Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose your sense of humour, you'll go friggin' nuts. And my very special guest today is Mike Harris. Mike's a man with a long track record. If you're living a life that's full and you're an intelligent person who with a can-do attitude, and people actually don't try and destroy you before you grow to fruition, you will look back on your track record full of success after success in business, in politics, and now in media, as Mike has had. And Mike, I'd like to welcome you to the program with my great honour and privilege and various other nice adjectives.
Well, Benny, thank you. The honor and the privilege is mine. I'm just delighted that you invited me to be your guest, and thanks for having me.
Well, we have a good 2 hours with you today, so let's not waste it. We had a number of different issues that we wanted to bring up that are buzzing around your head at the moment, namely the Federal Reserve fraud and the US economy and its state at the moment.
Well, that is about as open-ended, as nebulous a question as you can ask. Would you like to narrow it down a little bit for me? Give me a hand here. What do your listeners want to hear about?
Well, the thing for me is that the Fed has just released QE3 with $40 billion a month of mortgage-backed securities that they're planning on purchasing. And also we've had revealed on the show that they are going to be putting that $40 billion per month into derivatives and expand it and things of that nature. And we are also aware that now prices of virtually everything in the United States is starting to skyrocket, and some are saying that this could be the start of hyperinflation for the United States.
Well, that is the fear that we all have here in the USA, and the other fear is that the other economies of the world, Russia, China, the BRIC nations, are going to decouple from the US dollar as a reserve currency. And when that happens, that's going to be the other shoe falling, and you're going to see prices of the U.S. just for basic commodities go through the roof. So, but anyway, the Federal Reserve, let's talk about this. I mean, this is really a constitutionally mandated function of Congress that they outsourced. And they outsourced this in 1913. It's coming up for renewal next year. And it's time that the American people made their will known that we don't want the Federal Reserve. We think the Federal Reserve is a fraud. We think the Federal Reserve has failed at its mandate. And you look at what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to preserve the value of the dollar, and they were supposed to prevent the boom and bust cycle. The dollar's lost 97% of its value since the Federal Reserve started managing it, and the boom and bust cycle has been a lot of booms and a lot more bust, it seems. We've in my lifetime, we've had three great scams in the last 30 years. There's scams against the American people, and the first one was the S&L debacle. And you look at that, and really what that was is that was a transfer of wealth from people who had worked hard, made money, invested wisely, and then they changed the tax code, and what was a good investment a year ago now is a lousy investment. People lost tons of money on it, but other people made tons of money on it. So that was the first one. The second big scam that happened to the American people was the dot-com bubble. And that was a classic boiler room pump and dump stock scheme where you've got these companies that have no revenue, and they're trading at 180 times what their invested capital was. And everybody got out, made money, but the people left holding the bag. Who was the people who were left holding the bag? Well, the institutional investors. Who is that? That's your pension plans. That's CalPERS. That's all of these things. Now these organizations, your firemen, your policemen, your teachers unions, all of these pension plans now are underfunded because they lost so much money. And the third one we look at here is this issue here with this mortgage boom bust fraud that's been going on, where you look at the people who in good faith signed loan documents to buy a house. Well, you're finding fraud in the documents themselves. People were defrauded. There was excess fees. There were a number of things going on. Valuations were skewed. You had appraisers coming in and giving ridiculous appraisals for houses that were, 50%, 100% over their value. You had the securitization of those where they were bundled. They were bundling thousands of mortgages together. They were making it into a security. They were slicing those securities up, rating them as AAA when really they were D minus type securities. They were selling them as AAA. And the investors, again, the pension profit sharing plans were buying them. And everybody lost money on this except the banks. Now, all of this is going on. There's been so much happening, but have you seen anybody get arrested? Have you seen any bankers in handcuffs being perp walked out of the building? No, nobody has. So justice delayed is justice denied. And that's what's going on in this country. And that's really why so many people are hurting, recently since 2007, 2008 when that one happened. But there's just a number of issues that have been done. You can't examine any issue in isolation. There's always a link to something else that happened in the past.
Well, let's think about this. We've got all these connections with the Federal Reserve, the economy, and of course the Federal Reserve is owned by a number of other major corporate banks. I want to know, how are the shareholders and the actual companies that own the Federal Reserve doing in the global economy? Are they doing as well?
Well, they're not missing any meals, let's just say that. And none of the shareholders for the too big to fail banks have lost a dime. And it's my premise that if a bank is too big to fail, it's too big to allow it to survive, because it becomes a national security risk. If you look at your economy as a national security asset, and a bank is too big to fail, to where the taxpayers have to come in and intervene and deal with the problem of bad banking decisions that were made, and the taxpayers have to pay for that, that is a risk to national security because it harms the entire country and everyone in the country, which again, it goes back, this is another failure of government.
Well, is government anything but failure in the 20th century? Has anything actually improved, or has government simply grown and grown worse?
Well, we were warned in 1959 by then President Dwight D. Eisenhower that we had this thing called a military-industrial complex, and nobody knew what it was, and nobody knew what he was talking about at the time. I was just a child, but he warned us about this. And then his successor, who came in, John Kennedy, he went to make some true monetary reforms and some true reforms in how the U.S. was structured, how the U.S. was going to do business. And we see the result of that. He was murdered November 22nd, 1963. And since then, it's been a downward spiral. It's my contention, my belief. Can I prove it? No, I wasn't I wasn't an old enough child at the time. I was in fourth grade when JFK was killed. But I look at this in retrospect and I think to myself, Lyndon Johnson, he had his hands on this. George H.W. Bush had his hands on this. If you read Professor Jim Fetzer's work, he can show you pictures of George H.W. Bush in Daley Plaza the day of the murder, standing on the steps of the book repository there. And these are the guys who are still kicking around, who've never let go. And we've had this shadow government that since the Kennedy murder, when they really showed themselves for the first time, that's been out there, that's been functioning, that has been hiding under the elected government. But the shadow government really is where the power is. And the JFK murder was not an isolated incident. I want to remind people that his brother Robert was killed. When he was running in 1968, he was going to run against Richard Nixon. He just won the California primary. He was shot dead in the kitchen. There was 11 shots fired. Sirhan's gun only held 8. So you look at this and you think, something's going on. You look at who else has been killed. You look at George Wallace, who ran in 68 as well. He was going to run for president. He was shot. He was crippled, paralyzed, he did not, never ran again. Martin Luther King was assassinated. They were going after anybody who threatened their power structure. And that is a criminal cabal that has taken over and infected this country like a cancer. And it's not going to get any better until we, the people, stand up and do something. There ain't no Superman, folks. It's up to you and me, we, the people. And these things happen. And the perpetrators for all of these crimes, they go all the way up to 9/11. They've never been arrested. No one's ever been punished for any of this. So you think there's not a shadow government? There's a shadow government, and here's the footprints they've left in the sand. So the sands of time, let's just say that.
Well, there's a trail, and you've heard about the fractal universe theory, I take it?
Yes, I have.
Okay, because I have a theory called fractal scumbaggery. So,
Okay, well, please explain.
well, in the fractal universe, each thing that you look at, whether it be a galaxy or a human cell or whatever, it seems to repeat the pattern over and over again and keep expanding. So whichever thing you choose to look into, you'll find more than you can even handle. And fractal scumbaggery is you look into a scumbag who's engaging in scumbaggeries, let's say assassinations or financial terrorism or drug running of a major thing like a CIA, or involved in many different methodologies and different organizations. You look into that one person, or you look into that one incident, and it starts to expand again and again and again and make all these other connections, so that it matters not which rabbit hole or which direction you start looking into. You will find more scumbaggery the deeper you look, and it's infinite.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And if we can go back to the U.S. economy again, you look at the current situation the U.S. is in. We have depression level unemployment in the U.S. Our government tells us it's in the 8.2% or so. They're lying. They've manipulated the numbers. They change the metrics. They change how their methodology of measuring unemployment to where people who give up and quit looking no longer count. Even though they're not working, they're no longer looking, so therefore they're not unemployed. It's a semantic game playing. But you look at these things and you look at the source of this. How did the U.S. become deindustrialized? If you go back to the 1992 election, when it was George H.W. Bush running against Bill Clinton won. There was a third candidate there, a guy named Ross Perot. And Ross Perot was the guy who was famous for saying, if you sign NAFTA and if you sign GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, that giant sucking sound you hear is going to be U.S. jobs leaving the country. And everybody laughed at Perot and made fun of him. But you know what? Ross Perot was right. And they signed GATT and NAFTA in 1995. And you have to realize that from the time you implement a policy until you see the full effect of it, it may take some time. There's going to be a delay in there between the time it's implemented and the time you see the full effect. Well, this current downturn where we have 22%, 23% effective or underemployment, it's taken that much time for this thing to manifest fully. And the reason that what the Federal Reserve is doing now to jumpstart the economy is not working is because those jobs aren't here anymore. If we did a massive cash infusion, a jumpstart, another TARP, another $1 trillion to help jumpstart the economy, it's not going to help the American worker, but China's going to do great. And China has done great with these stimulus packages because the jobs aren't here, they're now over there. So you have to ask yourself the question, we did this to ourselves. How do we rectify this now? What possibly can we do to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.?
What can we do? Because you've had, 30 plus years in manufacturing. Your knowledge of that industry and particularly the offshoring of it must be exquisite.
Well, I have, and what I would suggest, and I would say that we need to look at the U.S. First of all, let's get rid of the IRS. Let's stop this nonsense of taxing income. It's not constitutional. They've finessed some ways around it, but let's get rid of the IRS because we don't need the IRS. Let's put the IRS to work on Wall Street and regulate those guys. If they need a new job, let's let them go be devil Wall Street and keep Wall Street honest and apply the resources where they can do the American people some good. But I think the solution might be to put a 45% import tariff on anything not manufactured in the USA. And that is if companies like General Electric or Apple Computer or General Motors or Hyundai or Toyota or anybody who makes products overseas to import and sell into the U.S.,